The message came at midnight, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez knew immediately that something was wrong, because the Galactic Council never sent emergency summons to species they considered unimportant. And humanity had always been unimportant to them. She stood in her office on Luna Station, reading the holographic text that floated before her eyes. And her hands did not shake even though her heart was beating fast. Because Elena had learned long ago that showing fear to aliens was the fastest way to be destroyed by them. The summons ordered her to appear before the full council within 24 hours. And it offered no explanation, no hint of what crime humanity had supposedly committed. And that silence was more frightening than any accusation could have been. Elena contacted Earth immediately, speaking with President Marcus Webb through an encrypted channel that even the Council's spies could not break. Or so they hoped, and the President's face was calm but his eyes were worried. "What do they want from us?" he asked, and Elena could only shake her head. "They did not say. But I have a feeling we are about to find out why so many young species disappear from the galactic stage," she replied. And the President nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 80 years ago, which was nothing compared to species that had existed for thousands or even millions of years. And in all that time, humans had noticed something strange about the galaxy. Young species rose and fell like waves on a shore, appearing with great promise and then fading into silence. And no one ever explained why, and no one ever asked. Because asking questions about powerful beings was dangerous. Elena took her personal shuttle to Nexus Prime, the great station at the center of the galaxy where all political power was concentrated. And during the long journey through hyperspace, she reviewed everything humanity knew about the Council. 12 species sat on the Council, all of them ancient, all of them wealthy beyond imagination, and all of them united by something that humans had never been able to identify. Some secret purpose that bound them together across the ages. The Zorani hegemony was the most powerful of them all, led by High Counselor Thalvex, a creature that resembled a tall insect with gleaming black eyes and mandibles that clicked when he was pleased, which was usually when someone else was suffering. Elena had met Thalvex once before, at a diplomatic reception where he had looked at her like she was an amusing pet, and she had smiled and made polite conversation while memorizing every detail of his arrogant face. Now she would face him again, and this time there would be no polite smiles. The shuttle docked at Nexus Prime, and Elena walked through corridors filled with aliens of every shape and size. Some walking, some floating, some slithering along the floor, and all of them moving aside when they saw her human uniform. She could not tell if they moved from respect or disgust, and she decided it did not matter. The council chamber was enormous, a vast dome of crystal and gold that could hold 10,000 spectators. And today it held exactly 12, the council members themselves, arranged in a semicircle of floating platforms high above the floor. Elena stood alone in the center, looking up at them. And she refused to feel small, even though that was clearly their intention. Ambassador Vasquez of the Human Coalition announced in a mechanical voice, "You stand before the Galactic Council to receive judgment." "Judgment for what?" Elena asked, her voice clear and strong. High Counselor Thalvex leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement, and when he spoke, his voice was like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Your species has been busy, Ambassador, building things in secret, making plans you thought we would not discover. But we see everything, and we know everything. And now you will answer for your deception." Elena kept her face calm even as her mind raced, wondering what they had found, what secrets had been betrayed, and by whom. "I am not aware of any deception," she said. "Perhaps you could be more specific," another council member spoke. A blob of shifting colors that humanity called the prismatic, though that was not their true name. And their voice was like music and screaming combined. "Project Prometheus," they said. "We know about your hidden military program, your secret weapons, your plans to challenge the natural order of the galaxy." Elena felt cold fear grip her heart. Because Project Prometheus was real, though it was not what they thought it was. And she could not explain the truth without revealing even more secrets. "I see," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And what do you intend to do with this information?" Dalvex made a sound that might have been laughter, and it was not a pleasant sound. "It depends entirely on you, Ambassador, or rather, on your species' willingness to cooperate with reasonable demands." He gestured with one long limb, and a holographic display appeared in the air, showing the Sol System, humanity's home, with the asteroid belt highlighted in red. "Your system contains valuable resources, minerals essential for faster-than-light travel. And we have decided that these resources would be better managed by the Council. You want us to surrender our asteroid belt?" Elena asked, and she could not keep the disbelief from her voice. "We want you to recognize the natural hierarchy of the galaxy," Dalvex replied. "Young species serve elder species. This is how it has always been. This is how it will always be. And humanity is very young indeed. And if we refuse?" The question hung in the air like a blade, and Dalvex's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. "Then we will release the information about Project Prometheus to every hostile species on your borders. And we will impose complete economic isolation on your worlds. And we will watch as your civilization crumbles into dust, as so many others have crumbled before you." Elena understood then, with perfect clarity, what had happened to all those young species who had disappeared. And she felt rage building in her chest like a fire that could not be contained, but she did not let it show. Because Elena Vasquez was a diplomat, and diplomats won their battles with patience and planning, not with anger. "I will need to consult with my government," she said. "This is not a decision I can make alone." "Of course," Dalvex replied, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "We are not unreasonable. We will give you 72 hours to accept our terms, and we are certain you will make the wise choice." "The wise choice," Elena repeated, and there was something in her tone that made several council members shift uncomfortably. "Yes," Dalvex said, "every young species faces this moment, and every young species makes the same decision in the end, because the alternative is extinction. And no species chooses extinction." Elena looked at him for a long moment, memorizing every detail of his smug expression, and then she smiled. And her smile was not friendly at all. "You will have your answer in 72 hours, she said. "But I want you to remember something, High Counselor." "And what is that?" "We are not every young species," Elena said. "We are humanity. And we have never been good at doing what we are told." She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed. And behind her, she heard Dalvex laughing, confident that humanity would break just like all the others. He was wrong, and soon the entire galaxy would know it. The emergency session began within hours of Elena's return to Earth. And the great hall of the unified government in Geneva was filled with the most powerful humans in existence. All of them angry, all of them afraid, and all of them looking for answers. President Marcus Webb stood at the center of the room, his face carved from stone, and he listened as Elena described everything that had happened in the council chamber. Every word, every threat, every clicking laugh from Dalvex's mandibles. When she finished, the room erupted into chaos, with military leaders demanding immediate action and diplomats urging caution and scientists asking questions that no one could answer. And the noise grew louder and louder until the president raised his hand. Silence fell instantly, because Marcus Webb was not a man who raised his hand often. And when he did, everyone listened. "Fleet Admiral Okonkwo," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Tell us about Project Prometheus. Admiral James Okonkwo was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his face from battles fought decades ago. And he stood up slowly, looking around the room at faces that ranged from curious to terrified. "Project Prometheus is not a weapon," he said. And the relief in the room was immediate. But he held up his hand to stop the celebration before it could begin. "It is not a weapon," he repeated. "But it is the most important secret humanity has ever kept. And if the Council discovers its true purpose, they will destroy us without hesitation." He activated a holographic display that showed a network of strange devices hidden throughout human space. Machines that pulsed with energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality. Prometheus is a system of emergency wormhole generators, he explained, capable of moving entire populations instantly across vast distances. And we built it because we always knew, that one day something would threaten humanity's existence. "You built an escape route," said one of the diplomats. And there was wonder in her voice. "We built a guarantee," Admiral Okonkwo replied, "that no matter what happens, humanity will survive, even if we have to flee to another galaxy entirely." President Webb nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of what he was hearing. And then he turned to another figure in the room. A woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, who had been silent until now. "Director Chen," he said. "What do we know about the Council's history with situations like this?" Director Sarah Chun was the head of Human Intelligence Services, and she knew more secrets than anyone else alive. And the secrets she knew about the Galactic Council were darker than anyone had imagined. "This is not the first time they have done this," she said, her voice flat and cold. "In fact, they have done it 17 times in the past 4,000 years, targeting young species who showed promise, who might one day challenge their power." She brought up images on the display, showing worlds that had been stripped of resources, civilizations that had been reduced to poverty and dependence, species that had been erased from history entirely. "The Volthani were the first," she continued. "A species of brilliant engineers who developed faster than light travel independently. And the Council demanded control of their shipyards, and when the Volthani refused, they were destroyed within a generation." "How were they destroyed?" asked President Webb. "Economic isolation first, cutting them off from all trade and resources, and then, when they were weak enough, the Council arranged for hostile border species to attack them, providing weapons and intelligence to their enemies." The room was silent, and the weight of 4,000 years of tyranny pressed down on everyone present. "The pattern is always the same," Director Chun said. "Blackmail, submission, exploitation, and for those who resist, extinction. And the galaxy has accepted this as normal because no one has ever had the power to challenge it. Until now," said a voice from the back of the room, and everyone turned to see a young officer standing at attention. His eyes burning with determination, President Webb looked at the young man for a long moment. And then he nodded. "Until now," he agreed. "But we cannot fight the Council alone. Their fleets outnumber ours 100 to 1. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. And they control the economic systems that keep our colonies alive." "Then we do not fight alone," said Elena, stepping forward. "Those 17 species the Council subjugated, how many of them still exist?" Director Chun checked her data quickly, and her eyes widened with surprise. 11 of them," she said. 11 species that were broken by the Council and forced into servitude. Species that everyone believes are obedient and harmless. But are they? Elena asked, and her voice was sharp with hope. "I do not know," Director Chen admitted. "We have never thought to ask them." President Webb began to pace, his mind working through possibilities that no human had ever considered. And when he stopped, there was something new in his eyes, something that looked like the beginning of a plan. "Contact them," he ordered. all 11 of them, use our most secure channels. And ask them one simple question. What question? Asked Elena. Ask them if they remember what they used to be, before the council broke them. Ask them if they want to be that again. The next 72 hours were the most intense in human history, with secret messages flying across the galaxy at speeds that should have been impossible, reaching worlds that the council believed were under their complete control. The responses came slowly at first, careful and afraid, because these species had learned over centuries that hope was dangerous and that resistance meant death. But then something changed. A leader of the Velthani descendants, a species that had been reduced to manual laborers on council worlds, sent a message that contained only 2 words. We remember. The Crystal, a warrior race that had been forbidden from carrying weapons for 3,000 years, responded with an ancient battle cry that had not been spoken aloud in generations, one by one. The subjugated species answered humanity's call, and their answers were all the same. Yes, they remembered who they were, and yes, they wanted to be free. President Webb gathered his advisors for a final meeting before the deadline, and the mood in the room had shifted from fear to something else entirely, something that felt like the moment before a storm. We have allies, he announced. Not enough to fight a direct war, but enough to do something the council has never seen before. What are we going to do? Asked Admiral Okonkwo. We are going to tell the truth, President Webb replied. And we are going to make sure everyone in the galaxy hears it. He turned to Elena, and his eyes were filled with a fire that she had never seen before. Ambassador Vasquez, you are going to return to Nexus Prime, and you are going to deliver humanity's answer. But you will not be alone, and you will not be afraid. What will I be? Elena asked. You will be the voice of every species that has ever been crushed under the council's heel, the president said. And you will show the galaxy that the age of tyrants is over. Elena nodded, and she felt something stirring in her chest, something ancient and powerful. The same feeling that had driven humans to fight impossible battles throughout their history. Remember what we are, she said. And the phrase spread through the room like wildfire, passed from person to person until it became a chant, a promise, a declaration of war against 4,000 years of oppression. The deadline was approaching, and humanity was ready to give its answer. The Galactic Council chamber was filled to capacity for the first time in centuries, because word had spread that something unusual was about to happen, and 10,000 spectators from across the galaxy had come to watch. Humanity's humiliation High Counselor Thalvex sat on his floating platform, his mandibles clicking with anticipation, and he had already prepared his victory speech. The same speech he had given 17 times before to 17 different species who had all learned the same painful lesson. The lesson was simple. Young species did not defy the council, and those who tried were destroyed. But when the great doors of the chamber opened, Thalvex felt the first hint of confusion, because Ambassador Elena Vasquez was not alone, and the beings who walked behind her were not supposed to be here. There were 12 figures following the human ambassador, representatives from 11 different species that the council had conquered long ago. Species that should have been broken and obedient. Species that had no right to stand in this chamber without permission. And there was something else. Something that made Thalvex's blood run cold. They were all wearing the same symbol on their clothing. A golden sun rising over a dark horizon. A symbol that he had never seen before, but somehow understood immediately. It was the symbol of hope. And hope was dangerous. What is the meaning of this? Thalvex demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. Elena stepped forward, and her face was calm and her voice was clear. And she did not look up at the council members on their high platforms because she refused to make herself small for them. I am here to deliver humanity's response to your demands, she said. But first, I would like to introduce my colleagues. She gestured to the beings behind her, naming each one in turn, representatives of the Volthani, the Crystal, the Prismatic Outcasts, the Serini, and 7 other species that had been crushed under the Council's heel for thousands of years. These individuals are here as witnesses, Elena continued. And as accusers. The murmur that swept through the spectators was like a wave crashing against rocks. And Thalvex felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear? Accusers? He repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. This is absurd. You are here to submit to the Council's demands, not to make accusations. I am here to do what is right, Elena replied. And what is right is for the galaxy to finally learn the truth about its so-called leaders. She raised her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. Visible to all 10,000 spectators and to the billions more who were watching through live broadcasts across the galaxy, the display showed documents, recordings, financial records, and communications that spanned 4,000 years of history. Evidence that the Council had been secretly manipulating young species since the beginning of their reign. This is the Volthani Accord of year 847, Elena said. A secret agreement in which the Council promised to destroy any species that developed faster than light travel without their permission. The display changed, showing another document. This is the Crystal Suppression Order of year 2103. Which authorized the murder of 90% of their warrior caste to prevent them from ever rising against Council rule. More documents appeared, one after another, each one more damning than the last. And the spectators watched in horrified silence as the truth of the Council's crimes was revealed. Thalvex was on his feet now, his mandibles clicking wildly, and his voice was desperate as he tried to regain control. These are forgeries, he shouted. Lies created by a primitive species that refuses to accept its proper place in the galaxy. Are they? Elena asked, and she turned to the Volthani representative, an elderly being with silver skin and eyes that had seen too much suffering. The Volthani stepped forward, and when they spoke, their voice trembled with emotion that had been suppressed for generations. My people were engineers, they said. We built ships that could cross the galaxy in hours, and we dreamed of sharing our knowledge with everyone. But the Council came to us with smiles and offers of friendship, and then they took everything from us. Another representative stepped forward, a Crystal warrior whose body was scarred from battles fought in secret against enemies the Council had sent to destroy his people. My ancestors were warriors who protected the weak and fought for justice, he said. And the Council called us dangerous, and they killed our best and brightest. And they forced us to serve as laborers on worlds we once defended, one by one. The representatives spoke, telling stories that have been hidden for thousands of years. And the spectators listened with growing horror and growing anger. Thalvex tried to interrupt, tried to dismiss their words as lies, but the evidence was too strong and the voices were too many. And finally, he made a decision that would change everything. Enough, he roared, and his voice silenced the chamber. This farce is over, guards. Arrest the human ambassador and her conspirators. But the guards did not move because they were watching the holographic display, which had changed again to show something new. Records from the Council's own archives. Records that had been stolen and distributed to every world in the galaxy simultaneously. That is impossible, Thalvex whispered. Those archives are protected by the most advanced security in existence. Your security was designed to stop aliens, Elena said. And there was a hint of a smile on her face. It was not designed to stop humans. Because you never thought we were smart enough to be a threat. The chamber erupted into chaos as 3 Council species immediately withdrew from the assembly. their representatives fleeing to their ships before they could be associated with the crimes that were now being broadcast across the galaxy. The Zorani delegation remained, and Falvek's S burned with hatred as he looked down at the human who had destroyed everything he had built. "You have made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The Zorani hegemony will not forgive this insult. We will destroy your worlds. We will enslave your people. We will erase humanity from the history of the galaxy." Elena looked up at him, and she did not flinch. And she did not back down. "You have spent 4,000 years making sure no single species could challenge you," she said. "You weakened them, divided them, turned them against each other. And you thought you were safe forever." She gestured to the representatives behind her, and to the 10,000 spectators who were watching with new eyes, and to the billions across the galaxy who were learning the truth for the first time. "But you never considered what would happen if they all challenged you at once." The chamber was silent, and in that silence, a new sound began to grow. The sound of cheering, coming from the spectators, coming from the broadcasts, coming from a galaxy that had finally been shown the truth about its upper source. Olive stared at Elena, and for the first time in his long life, he understood what it felt like to be afraid of a species younger than his own. "This is not over," he promised. "No," Elena agreed. "It is just beginning." She turned and walked out of the chamber, followed by her allies, and behind her, she heard the cheering grow louder, a sound that would echo across the stars and change the galaxy forever. The Council's reign of terror had lasted 4,000 years, and it had been broken in a single hour by a species that had existed for barely a fraction of that time. Humanity had given its answer, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Zorani fleet attacked without warning, 300 warships dropping out of hyperspace above Proxima Station, humanity's largest colony outside the Sol system, and 12,000 soldiers prepared to land and crush the human resistance before it could. Spread High Counselor Thalvex had given the order himself, furious beyond reason at the humiliation he had suffered in the council chamber. And he had promised his warriors an easy victory against a primitive species that had forgotten its place. He was wrong. The first wave of Zorani shuttles descended through the atmosphere, expecting to find a terrified civilian population ready to surrender. But instead they found something that no alien species had ever truly understood. Humans who had decided to fight Proxima Station had only 800 defenders. Soldiers and volunteers who knew they were outnumbered 15 to 1. But they had spent the hours before the attack preparing defenses that the Zorani had never seen before. They had turned every building into a fortress, every street into a trap, every shadow into a place where death could strike without warning. And they had done it all while singing old songs from Earth. Songs about courage and sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender. Commander David Chun stood at the center of the defense, a young man with his mother's sharp eyes and his father's steady hands. And he watched the enemy shuttles land with a calm that surprised even himself. "Remember," he said to his soldiers through the communication network, "we are not trying to win this battle. We are trying to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And we are trying to show the galaxy what humans can do when we have something worth fighting for." The first Zorani soldiers stepped out of their shuttles, tall insectoid warriors with armor that could stop most weapons and mandibles that could crush human bone. And they expected to see their enemies running in terror. Instead, they saw a human soldier standing alone in the middle of the landing zone, holding a sign that read, "Welcome to Proxima Station. We hope you enjoy your stay." The soldier was gone before the Zorani could react, vanishing into the shadows of the city. And the confusion that followed was the first crack in the enemy's confidence. The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 6 days. And every day, the Zorani commanders promised their soldiers that victory was close. And every day the humans proved them wrong. Human soldiers attacked from impossible angles, using tunnels and rooftops and maintenance shafts to strike at the enemy and then disappear. The 4 counterattacks could be organized, and the Zerani, who were used to fighting in massive formations on open battlefields, could not adapt to this strange new kind of warfare. On the second day, a squad of human engineers collapsed a building on top of a Zerani command post, killing 300 enemy soldiers and destroying their communication equipment. And the explosion could be seen from orbit. On the third day, human snipers eliminated the Zerani's best officers one by one, striking from distances that their sensors said were impossible. And panic began to spread through the enemy ranks. On the fourth day, a group of civilian volunteers, people who had never held weapons before in their lives, ambushed the Zerani supply convoy and captured enough food and ammunition to keep the defenders fighting for another week. Zerani commanders demanded more troops, more weapons, more resources, but Thalvex refused to send them, because admitting that 800 humans could hold off 12,000 Zerani warriors would be admitting that humanity was stronger than anyone had believed. Meanwhile, the political alliance that Elena had forged was transforming the galaxy. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Council for thousands of years suddenly opened to everyone, as species that had been afraid to act alone found courage in numbers, and the economic stranglehold that the Council had maintained began to crumble. 3 more Council species defected, joining what the galaxy had started calling the New Accord, an alliance built on the principles that Ambassador Vasquez had announced in the Council chamber: equality, transparency, and the right of all species to determine their own fate. The Zerani hegemony found itself increasingly isolated, with former allies refusing to answer calls for assistance and former subjects beginning to whisper about rebellion. And Thalvex watched his empire crumbling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. On Tavafon, the 5th day of the Battle of Proxima Station, reinforcements finally arrived, human warships from Earth, accompanied by vessels from the Crystal, and the Velthani and half a dozen other species that had decided to stake their future on humanity's cause. The Zerani fleet found itself surrounded by enemies it had underestimated for too long, and for the first time in the history of their species, they were forced to retreat from a battle they had started. Commander David Chun stood on the roof of a shattered building, watching the enemy shuttles flee toward their warships, and he felt exhaustion in every part of his body, but pride burning in his heart. "We did it," said a voice beside him. And he turned to see Crystal, the warrior who had spoken in the council chamber, standing beside him with a weapon in his hands and respect in his eyes. "We did it together," David replied. And the 2 soldiers, human and alien, looked at each other and understood that something had changed in the galaxy, something that could never be undone. But the war was not over. Thalvex, facing rebellion within his own hegemony and defeat on every front, retreated to his flagship and activated systems that had not been used in 4,000 years. Systems that he had hoped would never be needed deep in the heart of the ship. Ancient machines began to wake, machines that had been built by a species older than the Council itself. Machines that had the power to destroy entire star systems with a single command. "If I cannot rule the galaxy," Thalvex said to himself, his mandibles clicking with madness, "then I will burn it to the ground and build something new from the ashes." He entered the codes that would activate the weapon, and across the galaxy, alarms began to sound on worlds that had never known fear before. The final battle was about to begin, and everything humanity had fought for hung in the balance. The strike team assembled in the cargo bay of a stolen Zerani shuttle. 12 soldiers from 5 different species, united by a single purpose: stop Thalvex before he could destroy the galaxy commander. David Chun led the team, and beside him stood Crystal, the warrior whose ancestors had been crushed by the Council 3,000 years ago. And between them, was a bond that had been forged in the fires of Proxima Station. The weapon is located in the central core of Thalvex's flagship, David said, reviewing the holographic map one last time. Our intelligence suggests it is powered by technology from the precursors, the species that seeded the galaxy with life millions of years ago. The precursors were supposed to be a myth, said one of the Velthani soldiers, her silver skin reflecting the dim lights of the cargo bay. Many things we believed were myths have turned out to be true, Crickstall replied. Today we add another truth to the list. The shuttle approached Thalvex's flagship through a debris field left over from the battle, hiding among the wreckage of ships that had fought and died for both sides. And the pilot navigated with skill that came from desperation and hope. They docked at an emergency airlock on the lower hull, cutting through the seal with plasma torches and entering the ship through maintenance corridors that the Zorani had forgotten existed. The interior of the flagship was vast and dark, filled with machinery that hummed with ancient power, and the strike team moved through it like ghosts, avoiding patrols and security systems with a combination of human ingenuity and alien knowledge. The Council has ruled for 4,000 years because they controlled the precursor technology, Crickstall whispered as they moved deeper into the ship. They found the ancient machines and used them to build their empire. And they killed anyone who got too close to the truth. What is the truth? David asked. That the precursors did not disappear, Crickstall said. They simply stopped interfering because they wanted their children to grow up on their own. And the Council betrayed that trust by using the precursor gifts as weapons. They reached the central core after 2 hours of careful movement, finding themselves in a chamber that seemed to exist outside of normal space, filled with light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. At the center of the chamber stood Thalvex, his mandibles clicking furiously as he worked at a control panel that glowed with symbols no living being could read. Stop! David shouted, raising his weapon. Thalvex turned, and his eyes were filled with madness and desperation. And when he spoke, his voice was broken and strange. You are too late, he said. The weapon is already charging, and in 1 hour it will fire. And every star in this sector will explode simultaneously. And the new Accord will die before it can truly begin. Why? David demanded. Why would you destroy everything, including yourself? Thalvex laughed, and it was a terrible sound, hollow and empty of anything resembling sanity. Because the alternative is worse, he said. For 4,000 years I have ruled this galaxy, and I will not spend the rest of my life as a prisoner, watching everything I built be dismantled by primitives who do not understand the natural order. He lunged for the control panel, trying to accelerate the weapon's countdown, but Crickstall was faster, tackling the High Counselor to the ground with a warrior's precision. The 2 aliens struggled on the floor of the ancient chamber, and David ran to the control panel, trying to find a way to stop the weapon before it was too late. I cannot read these symbols, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. No one can, said a new voice. And David turned to see something impossible, a figure made of pure light, standing beside the control panel, watching him with eyes that held the wisdom of millions of years. Who are you? David whispered. We are what you call the precursors, the figure replied. And we have been waiting a very long time for someone like you to arrive. The figure gestured at the machine, and the symbols changed, becoming words that David could understand. This was never meant to be a weapon, the precursor said. It was meant to be a beacon, a signal that would call us back when the galaxy was ready to take its place among the greater community of existence. The Council turned it into a weapon, David asked. They misunderstood its purpose, as they misunderstood so many things, and they used their misunderstanding to justify their tyranny. But you have shown us that the galaxy has finally grown past the need for tyrants. The figure touched the control panel, and the weapons countdown stopped, and a new sequence began. A sequence that would send a message across the cosmos to beings that had waited millions of years for this moment. What happens now? David asked. Now the galaxy begins its next chapter, the precursor replied. And humanity will help write it. The figure faded away, leaving David alone with his team and the captured High Counselor. And outside the ship, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter than before 1 year later. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the podium of the new Galactic Assembly, looking out at representatives from over 200 species who had come together to build something better than what had come before. We are gathered here today to mark the first anniversary of the new accord, she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber and to billions of viewers across the galaxy. 1 year ago, humanity was told to submit or be destroyed, and we chose a third option. She paused, looking at the faces of beings who had once been enemies and were now allies. Beings who had been broken by tyranny and had found the strength to stand again. We chose hope, she continued. And we chose to believe that every species in this galaxy, no matter how young or how old, deserves the chance to determine its own destiny. The applause that followed was thunderous, a sound that would have been impossible just 1 year ago, when fear and submission were the only options the galaxy knew. Later that day, on Earth, in a small park in a city that had once been called Geneva, children from a dozen different species played together under a warm Suna-human child, no more than 6 years old, approached a young Zorani who sat alone on a bench, watching the others with eyes that held uncertainty and shame. Do you want to play with us? The human child asked, extending a small hand. The Zorani child looked at the hand for a long moment, remembering stories of what his people had done, remembering the fear and hatred that had defined his species for so long. And then he took the hand, and he let himself be led into the game, and for the first time in his young life, he understood what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. Nearby, Commander David Chun sat on another bench, watching the children play, and beside him sat Crystal, the warrior who had become his closest friend. Do you think it will last? Crystal asked. This peace we have built? David watched the human child and the Zorani child laughing together, and he thought about everything that had happened, everything that had been sacrificed, everything that had been gained. I do not know, he admitted, but I know that it is worth fighting for, and I know that as long as there are people willing to fight for it, there is hope. Crystal nodded, and the two soldiers sat in comfortable silence. Watching the children play, the galaxy had tried to break humanity, and instead, humanity had shown the galaxy how to heal. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the precursors watched, and they smiled, because they knew that their children had finally grown up, and the future was brighter than it had ever been before. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.